Hello students, today we will discuss hyperkalemia and anesthesia. Hyperkalemia is very much important. You should be able to diagnose and treat. It is most commonly asked question in the examination. First we will see about the potassium. The perioperative alterations in serum potassium are common and can be associated with significant morbidity and mortality. The most of the total body potassium is intracellular with a concentration of 150 milliequivalent per liter. The serum potassium normal ranges from 3.5 to 5 milliequivalent per liter. The serum values are approximately 0.4 milliequivalent per liter higher than plasma values due to release of potassium during clot formation in serum sample. The potassium plays crucial role in generation of action potential in excitable tissue. The threshold for action potential is determined by the ratio of the intracellular to extracellular potassium concentration, which is maintained. That means that intracellular and extracellular potassium concentration is maintained by sodium potassium ATPase pump, which is in the cell membrane. Alteration of the intracellular to extracellular potassium ratio have multiple electrophysiologic effects that involves not only resting membrane potential but also action potential duration and refractory period and depolarization. These are the conditions that depends. Now we will see the regulation, how potassium levels are regulated in the body. The regulation of potassium levels can occur either by transcellular shift of potassium, number 2, or alteration in the excretion of the potassium. These are the two conditions. Number 1, transcellular shift of the potassium and excretion of the potassium, by which the potassium levels are regulated. There are number of factors that stimulate transcellular shift. These factor includes number 1 acid base status, number 2 insulin, and number 3 catecholamines. The classical teaching of potassium shifts with acid base disorders has been that for every 0.1 unit change in potassium, for every 0.1 unit change in pH, the potassium level changes in opposite direction by 0.6 milliequivalent per liter. The insulin plays important role in potassium uptake in the cells. The beta adrenergic agonist also stimulate cellular potassium uptake. In contrast, alpha adrenergic agonist increase serum potassium levels. These are the methods how potassium levels are regulated. Now we will see the causes of hyperkalemia. The hyperkalemia is defined as serum potassium more than 5 milliequivalent per liter. This is less common in perioperative period than hypokalemia, because severe hyperkalemia may be life threatening. It must be rapidly detected and treated. That means hyperkalemia should be detected and treated rapidly. 3 potential causes of hyperkalemia should be considered. What are these 3 causes? Number 1, decrease excretion of the potassium. Number 2, increase intake of potassium, and cellular release of the potassium. These are the 3 factors. Potassium balance is regulated by the kidneys. and decreased excretion typically results is a result of renal failure. The hyperkalemia due to increased hyperkalemia may also occurs because of certain medication. These medication include potassium sparing diuretics. Examples are spironolactone, ACE inhibitors, ARBs, NSAIDs and heparin. Hyperkalemia is due to increase in potassium intake also. This intake typically iatrogenic, either by rapid administration of potassium replacement or potassium containing medication. Another is administration of stored blood. Administration of stored red blood cells is often cited a potential cause for the hyperkalemia. The cells release potassium over a period of time. By 21 days, potassium concentrations may be 25 to 30 milliequivalent per liter in the plasma. Because each unit of packed red cells contain approximately 100 ml of plasma, hyperkalemia is a primary concern only when rapid transfusion of large amount of blood is given. Following transfusion, the cells begin to take up by the potassium and hypokalemia may also ensue. The cellular release of potassium occurs due to cellular ischemia or death. The examples are bowel ischemia, necrosis, hemolysis, rhabdomyolysis and tumor lysis. Then because of scoline also, anesthesiologists are concerned with scoline. The large amount of potassium following administration of succinylcholine to a patient with neuromuscular disease. Second, prolonged immobilization or burn injuries that can cause hyperkalemia. In these conditions, there is a proliferation of extrajunctional receptors which will lead to exaggerated response. This is about the succinylcholine. Now we will see the consequences. What are the consequences of hyperkalemia? Number one, there is severe arrhythmias. There are ECG changes. The hyperkalemia can cause severe arrhythmias. Second, conduction abnormality. Third, cardiac arrest. Therefore, it should be treated aggressively. There are characteristic ECG changes. These changes include peak T waves. Second, flattening of V waves. Third, prolonged PR interval and widened QRS complex. Ultimately, given the ECG gives sine wave pattern. The specific potassium levels are associated with ECG pattern, they vary. This figure shows effects of hyperkalemia as manifested on electrocardiogram. You should note that there are peak T waves with mild to moderate hyperkalemia, and there is a loss of P wave with widening of the QRS complex and progression of sine wave which appears in severe hyperkalemia. These are the manifestations of ECG at various serum potassium levels. When there is a mild hyperkalemia, that means serum potassium within the level of 5.5 to 6.5 milliequivalent per liter, the ECG shows changes that are peak T waves, then prolonged PR segment. When there is a moderate hyperkalemia, that means serum potassium 6.5 to 8, there is loss of P waves, there is prolonged QRS complex, there may be ST segment elevation, and ectopic beats and escape rhythms may occur. Now, severe hyperkalemia, that means serum potassium more than 8 milligram per liter, there is progressive widening of QRS complex, sine wave, ventricular fibrillation, asystole, axis deviation, bundle branch block, and fascicular blocks can occur. These are the ECG manifestations at various levels of the serum potassium. Now we will see the treatment. Before that, we will see the diagnosis. The diagnosis of hyperkalemia is typically made by routine serum potassium measurements. If patients with continuous ECG monitoring, if there are tall T waves, that can often first, if there is tall T wave, that is the first tip. Then how will you diagnose? It will be diagnosed, hyperkalemia will be diagnosed on history, physical examination, and ECG changes. In patients with unexplained cardiac arrest who has dialysis shunt or catheter in place, hyperkalemia must be a high on the differential diagnosis. Now we will see the treatment. The treatment consists of stabilization of the cardiac membranes, second, intracellular shift of potassium, and third, potassium removal. The stabilization of the cardiac membranes. Acute symptomatic hyperkalemia is life-threatening and it should be treated aggressively. Even in absence of ECG changes, if serum potassium more than 6 milligram per liter, it warrants at least frequent monitoring should be done, though active treatment is not needed. Third, treatment falls in three categories. We have seen stabilization of the cardiac membranes. For the stabilization of cardiac membrane, we will give calcium administration. Calcium administration is mainstay of the initial treatment. Calcium salts antagonizes the adverse effect of hyperkalemia on the cardiac conduction and can be administered. It can be administered by two. Number one, it can be given in the form of calcium chloride or calcium gluconate. Calcium chloride is a venous irritant and should be given centrally. The dose is 15 to 50 milligram per kg. Another, calcium gluconate. This calcium gluconate can be given peripherally, peripheral veins, but it has one-third calcium of calcium chloride. Therefore, it requires 50 to 150 milligram per kg dose. The stabilizing effect of calcium salts are immediate and it can last for 30 to 60 minutes. Then we will see the transfer of potassium into the cells. This can be done by regular insulin, by beta agonist, and alkalinization of the blood. In this, the regular insulin, the intracellular shift of potassium can be achieved by several ways. Number one, insulin. Insulin will increase cellular uptake. Dose 0.1 unit per kg. The 0.1 unit per kg will decrease serum potassium within 15 to 30 minutes with a duration of 4 to 6 hours. Dextrose is given along with insulin concomitantly to avoid the hypoglycemia. This is about insulin. Then another is beta agonist. The beta agonist will also drive potassium intracellularly and it will lower serum potassium in most of the patients. The beta agonist will consist of albuterol, may be given by inhalationally or intravenously. The potassium levels falls faster with intravenous administration, but effect remains for a shorter time. The small transient rise in serum potassium may also occur with inhalational route. The nebulized albuterol 10 to 20 milligram will lower serum potassium by 0.6 to 1 milliequivalent per liter. The decrease will occur within minutes. It will last for 2 hours. Albuterol appears to act synergistically with insulin to lower the potassium. This is about beta agonist. Now we will see the alkalinization of the blood with sodium bicarbonate. Historically, it has been used to drive potassium intracellularly. Its effectiveness has recently been questioned. There is some suggestion that sodium bicarbonate is more effective in lowering serum potassium concentration in acidotic patients. On basis of current data, it is responsible to use sodium bicarbonate as an adjunct, particularly in acidotic patient. But it should not be relied on as a sole manual. Now we will see the measures to decrease removal of the potassium from the body. It will consist of loop diuretics, potassium binding resins, dialysis. Although the loop diuretics are excellent diuretics. It can be used in patients with renal function. Most of the patients with hyperkalemia have some degree of renal impairment. Then another is a sodium polystyrene sulfate, a potassium binding resin. It has been a mainstay of the treatment for potassium removal in patients with hyperkalemia, that is potassium binding resin. Each gram of resin binds approximately 0.5 milliequivalent of the potassium. The main site of action is colon. The resin may be administered either orally or by enema. The dose 0.5 to 1 gram per kg every 2 to 4 hours. When resins given orally, sorbitol is usually added to avoid the constipation. In refractory cases of hyperkalemia, the last is dialysis. Refractory cases of hyperkalemia, dialysis may be necessary. It will contain hemodialysis. Hemodialysis is most effective and can remove 25 to 30 milliequivalent of potassium per hour. High flow continuous renal replacement therapy may be used in less emergent cases. Another, peritoneal dialysis can remove 10 to 15 milliequivalent of potassium per hour. This is about the removal of the potassium. This chart shows the treatment of hyperkalemia in short. Number 1, stabilizing cardiac membrane. For the stabilizing cardiac membrane, we can give calcium chloride, we can give calcium gluconate. The dose of calcium chloride 1 to 2 gram IV. The calcium gluconate 3 to 6 gram IV. The onset within minutes and duration is 30 to 60 minutes. That is about calcium. Then another is transfer of potassium inside or into the cells. For that, regular insulin dose is 10 units intravenously along with dextrose 25 grams. Another is albuterol 10 to 20 gram nebulized or MDI with spacer. Third, sodium bicarbonate 50 to 100 milliequivalent. The onset 15 to 30 minutes for regular insulin. For nebulized albuterol within minutes, and for sodium bicarbonate onset will be slow, and the duration of action of regular insulin is 4 to 6 hours. For albuterol 2 hours. For sodium bicarbonate it is unpredictable. And for the removal of the potassium from body, we can use sodium polystyrene sulfate dose 30 to 40 grams orally or 60 grams by enema QID 2 to 4 hours. The onset will be within 60 minutes 60 minutes rectally and 120 minutes orally. Another is loop diuretics, action within minutes to hours, dialysis within minutes to hour. This is in short the treatment of hyperkalemia. Now we will see the algorithm of the treatment of hyperkalemia. In this, first we see if there are life threatening, assess if there is life threatening hyperkalemia is present, see whether there are any ECG changes, see whether a patient is in high risk group. High risk means patient is having renal failure, patient receiving dialysis, patient receiving causative medication, and serum potassium more than 6.5 milligram. If it is yes, step 1. First step is to stabilize the myocardium. How will you stabilize? We have seen. We can give the calcium chloride or calcium gluconate intravenously, 10 ml of 10% solution. Then consider repeating of the ECG. Repeating of the ECG. If there are ECG changes are present, we should repeat it. And what is the step 2? The step 2, shift potassium. In step 2 we will shift the potassium into the cell. For step 2 we will give IV human insulin, humulin, 10 to 20 units, IV glucose 25 to 50 grams. This is step 2, and repeat glucose measurements every 20 minutes. Here we will measure the glucose sugar levels every 20 minutes. Then third, in this nebulize salbutamol 10 to 20 milligram or salbutamol via MDI 0.18 milligram. All these things will come in step 2. Now step 3, enhance elimination of the potassium. While elimination of potassium, we will see the patient's volume status. If volume status is low, the attempt volume resuscitation. This resuscitation will be given by 0.9 sodium chloride if clinically indicated. If normal, patient's volume status is normal or high, and if there is urine output is present, yes, then we will give loop diuretics. The furosemide dose is 80 to 240 milligram. And if there is no urine output, we will go for hemodialysis will be required. This is about the algorithm of hyperkalemia. Now we will see the management of anesthesia. For the management of anesthesia, it is recommended that serum potassium concentration should be less than 5.5 milliequivalent per liter before elective surgery. Another correction of hyperkalemia before surgery is preferable. If this is not feasible, the steps should be taken to lower the potassium level immediately before induction of anesthesia by one or more of the methods indicated previously. The potassium level may influence selection of the drugs for the induction and maintenance of anesthesia, because preoperative medications that induce some degree of hypoventilation or respiratory acidosis may cause further transcellular potassium shift. Then we will see about the succinylcholine. The succinylcholine, which only increases potassium concentration by 0.5 milliequivalent per liter in healthy patients. Therefore, it is best avoided in absence of urgent need for it. Then, effect of muscle relaxants may be exaggerated in these patients, those patients having muscle weakness from hyperkalemia. Both respiratory and metabolic acidosis must be avoided. Why? Because since either will exacerbate, metabolic or respiratory acidosis will exacerbate the hyperkalemia and its effects. Then potassium containing IV fluids, examples are Ringer lactate or lactated Ringer solution, which will contain 4 milliequivalent per liter of potassium. Another solution, Normosol, which contain 5 milliequivalent per liter of potassium, should be avoided. This is about the intraoperative management. Thank you.